dying rancher gave his last medicine to a native girl. The next morning, the shaman was at his bedside. The rancher had learned to live with pain quietly. He was a tall man once, strong from years of working the land, but sickness had slowly taken that strength away. Now he moved carefully, counting every step, every breath. His small wooden house stood alone at the edge of wide, dry land, far from towns and hospitals. He stayed there because it was all he had ever known, and because leaving felt harder than staying. Each morning he woke before sunrise, not because he needed to, but because sleep no longer came easily. His chest felt heavy most days, and his hands shook when he reached for his medicine bottle. The doctor had warned him months ago that his condition was serious. The medicine reminded his body how to keep going, but the supply was limited. When it ran out, there would be no easy replacement. The nearest clinic was far, and his body was too weak for long travel. That morning was colder than usual. The wind moved across the land with a sharp bite, slipping through the cracks in the old house. The rancher wrapped himself in a thick jacket and stepped outside. The sky was pale, and the sun was just beginning to rise. He checked the water troughs, moved slowly along the fence, and paused often to catch his breath. Every small task felt like a long journey now. By the time the sun climbed higher, his body was exhausted. He returned inside and sat at the small table near the window. The medicine bottle rested in his pocket. He counted the pills again, even though he already knew the number by heart. There were only a few left. Each one meant another day of breathing a little easier, another night of rest instead of fear. As evening came, the temperature dropped quickly. The rancher lit a small fire and warmed a simple meal. He ate slowly, listening to the quiet sounds of the land outside. Nights were usually peaceful, but sometimes the silence felt heavy. He thought about the life he had lived. The years of hard work, the friendships that faded, the family he never started. He had always believed that being strong meant standing alone. Later that night, just as he was settling into bed, he heard something unusual, a sound carried by the wind. At first he thought it was an animal, but it didn't match anything he knew. It was softer, weaker, almost like someone trying to call out but lacking the strength. His heart began to beat faster. He sat up, listening carefully. The sound came again, faint but clear enough now. A human voice. The rancher hesitated. His body ached, and stepping outside at night was not easy for him anymore. Still, something inside him would not let him ignore it. He grabbed a lantern, pulled on his boots, and opened the door. Cold air rushed in, making him cough. He followed the sound slowly, each step careful. Near the edge of his land, close to a dirt path rarely used, he saw a small figure lying on the ground. As he moved closer, the lantern light revealed a young native girl. She looked no older than 10 or 11. Her clothes were thin and her face was pale. Her breathing was shallow and her eyes were half open but unfocused. The rancher knelt beside her, feeling fear rise in his chest. He had no medical training, no tools, and very little strength. He gently spoke to her, asking if she could hear him. Her lips moved, but no words came out. He touched her hand and it felt cold. He knew she needed help quickly. He carried her carefully back to his house, stopping often to rest. Every step sent pain through his body, but he kept going. Once inside, he laid her on his bed and wrapped her in blankets. He placed the lantern close so he could see her face clearly. He searched his memory for what to do. She was weak, shaking slightly and struggling to breathe properly. He thought of his medicine. The pills in his pocket felt heavier than ever. The doctor had told him not to miss a dose. Even skipping one could cause serious trouble for his body. He stood there for a long moment, staring at the bottle. His hands trembled. He knew what the medicine did for him. Without it, the night could become dangerous. His chest already felt tight from the effort of carrying her. But when he looked at the girl again, he saw fear in her eyes. Not just fear of sickness, but fear of being alone. He thought about how she had ended up there, far from home in the cold. He didn't know her story, but he knew she would not survive the night without help. The decision felt heavy but clear. He crushed part of the medicine carefully and mixed it with warm water, hoping it would help her breathe more easily. He helped her sip it slowly, speaking softly to keep her calm. After some time, her breathing became steadier. The shaking lessened and her eyes finally closed in sleep. The rancher sank into a chair beside the bed, exhausted. His chest burned and his head felt light. He knew he had given away something his body needed. He didn't know what the night would bring for him now. As the hours passed, his condition worsened. His breathing grew more difficult and waves of pain moved through him. He lay down on the floor near the bed, not wanting to disturb the girl. Each breath felt like work. He wondered if this choice would be the last one he ever made. In the quiet darkness, memories returned to him. He remembered times when he had looked away from people in need because helping felt inconvenient. He remembered moments when fear had stopped him from doing what he knew was right. This time there had been no hesitation in his heart, even if his body had protested. Outside, the wind slowed. Somewhere in the distance, faint voices carried across the land. He wondered if someone was searching for the girl. That thought gave him a small sense of peace. As morning approached, the rancher's strength faded further. His vision blurred and his breathing was shallow. Still, he felt no regret. He had done what he believed was right. If this was the end, he accepted it quietly. The sun began to rise, casting soft light through the window. The girl stirred and opened her eyes. She sat up slowly, confused at first, then alert. She looked at the rancher on the floor and realized what he had done for her. Tears filled her eyes. She slipped out of the house silently and ran toward the distant hills. The rancher did not see her leave. His eyes were closed, his breath barely moving. He did not know that his choice had already set something much bigger into motion. Night wrapped itself around the ranch like a heavy blanket. The small wooden house stood silent, with only the soft crackle of dying firewood and the slow, uneven sound of the ranchers breathing inside. He lay on the floor near the bed, his body curled slightly, his jacket pulled close. Each breath felt thinner than the last, like air was slipping through his fingers no matter how hard he tried to hold on. His chest tightened again, sharper this time. He opened his eyes, staring at the wooden ceiling above him. The beams were old, darkened by years of smoke and time. He had repaired them himself long ago, back when his hands were steady and his body obeyed him. Now even lifting his arm felt like lifting a heavy stone. He tried to sit up but failed. A quiet sound escaped his lips, half a breath, half a sigh. He stayed still after that, saving what little strength he had left. He turned his head slightly and looked toward the bed. The girl was sleeping peacefully now. Her face looked calmer, warmer than before. Seeing that brought him a small comfort. He wondered where she had come from. The land around his ranch was wide and empty, but he knew it did not truly belong to him alone. Long before fences and roads, other people had walked these paths. He had heard stories when he was younger, but like many others, he had never asked enough questions. The night grew colder. Wind pressed against the walls, making the house creak softly. The rancher's thoughts drifted in and out. Sometimes he felt awake, fully aware of the pain in his chest and the weakness in his limbs. Other times, memories pulled him away. He remembered being a young man, riding across the land under an open sky, believing his strength would never fade. He remembered choosing work over family, silence over conversation. He told himself he didn't need anyone. The land was enough. The animals were enough. Loneliness felt easier than disappointment. But now, lying on the floor, he realized how quiet his life had become. No voices, no footsteps, just the slow passing of time. His breathing became uneven again. He pressed his hand against his chest, feeling his heart struggle. He thought about the medicine he had given away. For a brief moment, fear touched his mind. Not fear of dying, but fear of pain. Fear of being awake while his body failed him. Then he looked at the girl again. The fear faded. He reminded himself that she had needed it more. That she had her whole life ahead of her. That no one should be left alone in the cold if someone else could help, even if that help came at a cost. Time passed strangely after that. He could not tell how many hours had gone by. Sometimes he thought he heard voices outside, but when he focused, there was only the wind. His mouth felt dry and his hands were numb. He whispered a few words into the empty room, not sure who he was speaking to. Maybe himself, maybe the land. At some point the fire went out completely. Darkness filled the house, thick and complete. The rancher's thoughts slowed. His breaths came shallow and slow. He felt himself slipping, like drifting toward sleep but without the promise of waking. Then something changed. A faint sound reached his ears. Not the wind, not his own breathing, footsteps. He forced his eyes open. His vision was blurry, but he could make out shadows moving beyond the window. A quiet voice called out, low and careful, in a language he did not understand. Another voice answered, closer this time. The door opened slowly. Cold air rushed in, followed by the soft glow of a lantern. Shapes filled the doorway, people, several of them. They moved carefully, respectfully, as if entering a sacred place. The rancher tried to speak, but his throat would not work. Panic rose briefly, but it was gentle, distant, like a wave far from shore. A figure knelt beside him. An older man, his face calm, his eyes sharp and kind. He wore simple clothing, and around his neck hung a small object made of stone and leather. The older man did not rush. He studied the rancher's face, his breathing, the way his chest struggled to rise. He placed 2 fingers gently against the rancher's wrist, feeling his pulse. Then he nodded slowly, as if confirming something he already knew. Another person moved to the bed and checked on the girl. She was awake now, sitting up, her blanket wrapped around her shoulders. She spoke quickly, pointing toward the rancher. Her voice trembled with emotion. The older man listened without interrupting. When she finished, he closed his eyes briefly, as if offering silent thanks. Then he turned his attention fully to the rancher. The rancher watched all of this like someone watching a dream. He felt too weak to be afraid. Instead, a strange calm settled over him. He sensed that these people were not here to harm him. Their movements were careful. Their voices were low. There was no anger in their presence. The older man spoke softly, though the rancher did not understand the words. Still, the tone carried meaning. It was gentle, respectful. Hands lifted the rancher slightly and placed something warm beneath his head. Someone covered him with a thick blanket. A small cup touched his lips, and a warm liquid passed into his mouth. It tasted earthy and bitter, but it soothed his throat. His breathing eased just a little. The older man stayed beside him, watching closely. He placed his palm lightly on the rancher's chest, not pressing, just resting there. The touch was grounding, steady. The rancher felt less alone than he had in years. The night continued to move forward, but the house no longer felt empty. Quiet voices came and went. Someone added wood to the fire. Warmth returned slowly. The rancher drifted in and out of sleep, but this time it felt different, safer. When he woke again, the sky outside was beginning to change color. Dark blue softened into gray. Morning was coming. The rancher's body still hurt, but the sharp edge of panic was gone. His breathing was steadier than before. He turned his head and saw the older man sitting nearby, eyes closed as if resting without truly sleeping. The rancher tried to speak again. This time, a sound came out, rough and quiet but real. The older man opened his eyes and leaned closer. He did not ask questions. He did not demand explanations. He simply listened. The rancher managed a few broken words. He pointed weakly toward the girl, then toward his pocket where the medicine bottle lay empty. His eyes filled with emotion, not regret but relief. The older man understood. He nodded once, slowly, deeply. He spoke a few words in response, words the rancher did not understand, but the meaning was clear. Gratitude, respect, acknowledgement. As the sun rose fully, light filled the room. The girl stood near the door now, watching the rancher with wide eyes. She stepped forward and placed something small on the table beside him, a simple charm made of thread and bone. She bowed her head slightly, then stepped back. The rancher closed his eyes again, exhaustion pulling at him. But this time, it was not the exhaustion of giving up. It was the exhaustion that comes after doing something that matters. He did not know what the day would bring. He did not know if his body would recover or fail. But for the first time in a long while, he felt connected to something beyond himself. Outside, the land stretched wide and quiet, just as it always had. But inside the small wooden house, something had changed. Morning light slowly filled the small wooden house. It came in through the dusty window, soft and pale, touching the walls, the table, and finally the rancher's face. He opened his eyes little by little, unsure at first where he was or what had happened. His body still felt weak, but the sharp pressure in his chest was lighter than before. For a moment he thought he had dreamed everything. The girl, the voices, the people in the night. He tried to move his hand, and though it trembled, it obeyed him. That alone surprised him. He took a careful breath. It was not easy, but it did not feel like it was tearing him apart anymore. He turned his head slowly. Someone was sitting beside his bed. It was the older man from the night before. He sat very still, his back straight, his hands resting on his knees. His eyes were open now, watching the rancher quietly. There was no rush in him, no worry on his face, just calm attention like someone listening to the land itself. The rancher swallowed and tried to speak. His voice came out rough and low, but it came. "You stayed." The older man nodded once, a small, respectful motion. He answered softly, his words slow. The rancher did not understand the language, but he understood the meaning. He was not alone. The rancher shifted slightly, feeling the blanket around his shoulders. It was thicker than the ones he owned, warmer. He noticed the fire was burning again, steady and strong. The room smelled different too, not just smoke and wood, but something earthy like plants after rain. He looked around. The girl was not in the room anymore. For a brief moment, worry touched his mind. Then he saw her through the window, standing outside with two other women. They were speaking quietly, their heads closed together. She looked stronger now. She stood straight. She laughed softly at something one of them said. Seeing that made the rancher's chest tighten, but not with pain, with something else. The older man followed his gaze and spoke gently, as if explaining. The rancher caught only one word spoken in broken English. "Safe." The rancher nodded slowly. His eyes burned slightly. He turned back toward the older man. "I didn't know what else to do," he said. "She needed help." The older man listened closely. When the rancher finished, he placed his hand over his heart and bowed his head slightly. It was not a large gesture, but it carried weight. "You gave," the older man said carefully in English, "when you had little." The rancher looked down at his hands. They looked thin, older than he remembered. "I just did what anyone should." The older man shook his head slowly. "Not everyone does." They sat in silence for a while after that. It was not uncomfortable. It felt natural, like sitting with an old friend even if few words were spoken. Outside, the wind moved gently through the grass. Birds called from a distance. The rancher became aware of his body again. He still felt weak but different, not like he was slipping away, more like he was standing at the edge of something unknown. He didn't know if it was recovery or simply more time. "Will I?" He stopped, unsure how to finish the sentence. The older man did not rush him. "Will I be okay?" the rancher finally asked. The older man considered this. He did not offer false comfort. He did not look away either. "Your body is tired," he said. "It has worked hard for many years. We can help it rest. We can help it find balance. But time walks its own path." The rancher understood. He had lived close enough to the land to know that some things could not be forced. "That's fair," he said quietly. The older man reached into a small pouch at his side and removed a bundle of dried plants tied with string. He placed it on the table, then poured warm water into a cup and added a small amount of crushed leaves. He handed the cup to the rancher. "Drink slowly." The rancher did as he was told. The taste was strong, bitter, but not unpleasant. It warmed his chest as it went down. He closed his eyes for a moment, focusing on his breathing. As the morning passed, more people came and went, always quietly, always respectfully. No one touched his things without asking. No one treated him like he was weak or helpless. They treated him like someone who mattered. The girl came inside later. She stood near the door at first, unsure. The rancher smiled at her weakly. "You look better," he said. She nodded quickly. "Because of you." She stepped closer and held out a small bundle wrapped in cloth. Inside was food, simple, warm, carefully prepared. "Eat," she said. "You need strength." The rancher took a small bite. It was the best thing he had tasted in a long time. Later, when the sun stood higher, the older man asked permission to step outside with him. With help, the rancher was guided to a chair near the door so he could look out over his land. The air was fresh, the sky wide and blue. The older man stood beside him, looking out at the open space. "This land remembers," he said quietly. "It remembers kindness, it remembers harm too." The rancher nodded. "I wasn't always kind." The older man glanced at him. "But you chose to be." That stayed with the rancher. As the day went on, he felt moments of strength followed by deep tiredness. He slept often. Each time he woke, someone was nearby, not watching closely, just present. By late afternoon, the older man sat with him again. "You have lived alone a long time," he said. The rancher gave a small smile. "I thought that was strength. And now?" The rancher looked at the girl laughing outside again, at the smoke rising gently from the fire, at the way the house felt full without feeling crowded. "Now I think strength can also mean letting others stay." The older man smiled then, not wide, just enough. As evening approached, the group prepared to leave for the night. They did not rush. They did not disappear without words. The older man stood before the rancher. "We will return," he said. "You are not forgotten." The rancher believed him. When they were gone, the house was quiet again. But it was a different kind of quiet now. It did not feel empty. The rancher lay back and closed his eyes. His body was still weak. His future still uncertain. But his heart felt lighter than it had in years. Whatever time remained to him, he knew one thing. He would not spend it looking away. The days that followed moved gently, like a slow river. Morning came and went, then afternoon, then night, each one blending into the next. The rancher no longer measured time by the clock on the wall. He measured it by small changes in his body and quiet moments of connection. Every morning, someone came. Sometimes it was the older man. Sometimes it was the girl, often with one of the women from her community. They never arrived loudly. The door would open softly, or he would hear footsteps outside before a careful knock. They always waited for his answer, even when his voice was weak. The rancher began to notice how different this felt from his old life. Before, days passed with no one to witness them. Now, even the simplest moments were shared. A cup of warm drink, a few steps outside the door, a short conversation by the fire. His body was still fragile. Some mornings he woke feeling stronger, hopeful. Other mornings, the weakness returned without warning. His chest would tighten, and his hands would shake as if reminding him that healing was not a straight path. Still, something had changed deep inside him. He no longer faced those moments alone. The older man never promised more than he could give. He did not speak of miracles. Instead, he spoke of balance, of listening to the body, of allowing rest without guilt. "You spent many years pushing," he said one afternoon as they sat near the open door. "Even when your body asked you to stop." The rancher smiled faintly. "That sounds like me." "Now," the older man continued, "you must learn something harder." "What's that?" "Receiving." The word stayed with the rancher long after the man left that day. Receiving felt strange. For so long, he had believed value came from effort, from working until there was nothing left to give, from standing alone. Letting others help felt like weakness at first. But slowly he began to understand it differently. When the girl brought him food, he did not rush to say he could manage on his own. He thanked her. When someone cleaned the floor or added wood to the fire, he did not protest. He allowed it. Each time he did, the tight feeling in his chest eased just a little more. The land outside his house seemed to change too, though he knew it was mostly his own perspective. The same wide fields stretched before him, the same fence lines, the same distant hills. But now when he looked at them, he did not feel separated. He felt connected. One afternoon, the older man asked him about the ranch. "How long have you lived here?" he asked. "All my life," the rancher replied. "I was born not far from here, learned to walk on this dirt." The older man nodded. "Then this place knows you well." The rancher thought about that. He had always seen the land as something to work, to manage, to survive on. He had never thought of it as something that knew him. That evening, the girl sat with him near the fire. She was quieter than usual. After a while, she spoke. "I was scared that night," she said. "I know," the rancher replied gently. "I thought no one would see me," she continued. "I thought I would just disappear." The rancher felt his throat tighten. "I saw you," he said. "And I'm glad I did." She looked at him carefully as if studying his face. "You didn't have to help," she said. "You were already sick." "I know," he answered, "but I wanted to." She nodded slowly, then reached into her pocket and took out the small charm she had left on his table before. "This is for protection," she said. "Not just for the body, for the heart." The rancher held it carefully. It was simple, but it carried weight. As the days passed, the visits continued. Sometimes they stayed long, sometimes only a short while. No one overstayed. No one treated his home like it belonged to them. They respected his space as much as they respected his life. One morning, the rancher surprised himself by standing up on his own and taking a few steps outside without help. His legs trembled, but they held. He breathed in the fresh air, deep and slow. The older man watched from a distance, saying nothing. When the rancher sat back down, tired but smiling, the man nodded once. "That is enough for today," he said. "Knowing when to stop is also strength." That lesson did not come easily. Some days the rancher wanted to do more than his body allowed. He wanted to prove something, though he wasn't sure to whom. Each time he pushed too far, the weakness returned quickly. But instead of frustration, he felt patience growing inside him. A quiet understanding that healing was not a race. At night, when he lay in bed, he no longer feared the dark. The silence felt different now. It was full, not empty. He knew that even when he was alone, he was not forgotten. He thought often about the choice he had made that night, about the medicine, about the moment he decided to help without knowing the outcome. For the first time in his life, he did not measure that choice by what it cost him. He measured it by what it opened. One afternoon, as the sun lowered in the sky, the older man spoke more openly. "There is a long history between our people and others," he said carefully. "Much pain, much silence." The rancher listened, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "You did not create that history," the man continued, "but you stepped into it with kindness. That matters." The rancher swallowed. "I can't change the past," he said. "No," the older man agreed. "But you changed a moment, and moments are where healing begins." Those words stayed with him. As the weeks went on, the rancher's strength slowly improved. Not enough to return to his old life, but enough to sit longer, to walk short distances, to breathe without constant fear. He knew his body would never be what it once was. But he no longer saw that as failure. He saw it as a different season. One evening, as the group prepared to leave, the older man paused at the door. "We will not always come as often," he said gently. "Life calls us back too." The rancher nodded. "I understand. But we will come," the man added. "And you know where to find us." The rancher smiled. "That means more than you know." When the door closed behind them, the rancher sat quietly, the fire glowing low. He looked around his small house. It was the same as before, the same walls, the same table, the same worn chair. But it no longer felt like a place where someone waited to fade away. It felt like a place where something had been repaired, not just in his body, but in his heart. Time moved forward, steady and quiet. The rancher learned to live inside its rhythm instead of fighting it. Some mornings he woke before sunrise just as he always had, but now he stayed in bed a little longer, listening to the land wake up around him. The wind through the grass, the soft calls of birds, the distant sound of hooves. These sounds reminded him that life continued, with or without hurry. His body never fully returned to what it once was. He accepted that slowly, without anger. Some days were good. He could walk outside, sit beneath the open sky and breathe deeply without fear. Other days were harder. His chest would feel heavy and his strength would fade quickly. On those days he rested without shame. The older man continued to visit, though not as often. When he came, he never stayed too long. He understood when silence was enough. Sometimes they talked about the land, sometimes about the past, sometimes about nothing at all. One afternoon, the rancher asked a question that had been sitting quietly inside him for weeks. "Why did you come back?" he asked, "after that first night?" The older man looked out across the fields before answering. "Because a choice was made," he said simply, "and choices leave marks." The rancher thought about that. He had spent his life believing that big actions were the only ones that mattered. Hard work, long hours, visible effort. Now he understood that small moments, quiet decisions could change paths just as deeply. The girl visited often too. She brought food, water, and sometimes stories. She spoke about her family, about the hills beyond the ranch, about lessons she was learning. Each time she came, she seemed stronger, more confident. The rancher liked listening to her voice. It reminded him of things he had forgotten. One day she asked him, "Are you afraid?" He knew what she meant. Not just fear of pain, but fear of what comes after. He thought carefully before answering. "I used to be," he said, "mostly afraid of being alone, of being forgotten. And now," he smiled softly, "now I know that what we give stays, even when we don't." That seemed to satisfy her. She nodded and squeezed his hand before leaving. As seasons changed, the land shifted colors. Dry grass gave way to green. Then green faded back to gold. The rancher watched it all from his porch, wrapped in a blanket, breathing slowly. Each season felt like a gift rather than a reminder of time passing. Neighbors who had not visited in years began to stop by. Word had traveled quietly, carried by simple conversations and shared respect. No one came out of curiosity alone. They came with kindness, with food, with offers of help. The rancher accepted what he could and declined gently when needed. He was no longer trying to prove strength. He was simply living honestly. One evening, as the sun dipped low, the older man sat beside him one last time. The air was cool, the sky wide and clear. "You have done enough," the man said softly. The rancher nodded. He understood what was being said. "If you feel tired," the man continued, "that is not failure, it is rest earned." The rancher looked at the horizon. "I don't regret anything," he said, "not even the hard parts." The older man smiled. "That is peace." In the days that followed, the rancher grew weaker, not suddenly, not with fear, just gradually, like a candle burning lower. He slept more. He spoke less. But when he did speak, his words were calm. The girl came and sat with him often, holding his hand, humming softly. The older man visited once more, placing a gentle hand on the rancher's chest, not to heal, but to honor. On a quiet morning, with light filling the room and the sound of wind outside, the rancher closed his eyes and did not open them again. There was no struggle, no fear, just stillness. The land held the silence respectfully. Days later, people gathered at the edge of the ranch. There was no grand ceremony, no speeches, just shared presence. The girl placed the charm back on the table where he had first seen it. The older man stood quietly, eyes closed, offering gratitude. The ranch did not become empty after that. People continued to walk its paths. To remember, to speak his name with respect. The house remained standing, filled with quiet meaning. And long after, when people told the story, they did not speak first of sickness or weakness. They spoke of a choice, a simple act of kindness, and how it changed everything.